How's it going? All right. So we're going to be in Romans again today, but I'm going to share something with you first. Oh, sound like a countdown. Freaked me out a little bit. I lost my place last service. I forgot to get it back. Anybody gain weight when they go on vacation? So I'll just say this. So I got on the scale this morning. So vacation is not a good excuse because that was like a month ago, but I like to use it. I got on the scale this morning, and I was 5 pounds heavier than I was last time I was on the scale. And you know when that happens, you always get off and back on, like, something was wrong. You know what I mean? And I'm the kind of person that, I'll just say it this way. I take the least amount of extra weight on the scale with me as possible. You know what I'm saying? Like if I go to the doctor and they weigh me, I'm like, my keys probably weigh 4 pounds, so I'm not worried about it, you know? And so I got on there, it's 5 pounds heavier. And like, here's the problem when it comes down to it. Like when I eat, I don't want to think about the scale, right? Like when I eat, I want, like if I go out to eat, I want to look at what I want and order that thing. And then maybe something else too. Like, you know what I'm saying? And like the fact that they started putting calorie counts on menus, that's evil and wrong. You can't enjoy lunch. You can't enjoy dinner. Like it's not, you know, and then like if I eat at home, I'm going to make some concoction that is just ungodly, right? Like I'll make like fried rice, but when I say fried rice, I mean like I will literally fry the rice till it's crispy on the bottom. Yeah. But then like it's covered in oil. So now I've taken it and made it like just a little fat, crunchy thing, you know? And like that's like, you know, that's what I like. And here's the thing. I know that there are ways that you can eat that make this better. Like there's diets, but there's also just like, you know, lifestyles. Like there's ways that you can eat that fixes it. But it never works right. Like I was doing that in the spring and I started doing it and I'm like, this works because I can eat all the steak I want. You know what I mean? And just eat vegetables with it and then don't eat anything else. You know what I mean? And I'm like doing it, it's working. But then, you know, you go along and it's like, maybe I can, that's not going to matter that much. Like, that's not going to matter that much. That's not going to matter that much. I'm only having like one sweet tea and then it becomes, I'm only having like one a day. Right? And then it becomes like, I really like chocolate chip cookies. I'll just cheat today. And then all of a sudden, every day you're cheating. You know what I'm saying? And then you get on the scale and it's heavier and you're like, what? You know, and my first reaction this morning was funny. It was, man, I don't know how I could work out any harder. And at the end of the day, that's not the problem. It's input, not output. And, you know, I think that that first of all, that mirrors our spiritual lives in a lot of ways, right? Like it's when things are good sometimes, and then things get bad because it's like just this, just that. Like I'm just busy today, or I just whatever, or you know, and next thing you know, it's not as good as it was. It's you know, and then on top of that, like the point, like. More often than not, we're mad about the output, but the issue is the input, right? And so we're going to unpack that a little bit today. We're going to be in Romans chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 21. I am going to backtrack for just a minute once we go through it, but Romans chapter 3, verse 21. But now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood. He received to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so as to be just and the only one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? Is it excluded? Because of what law? The law that requires works? No, because because of the law that requires faith. For we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles too? Yes, the Gentiles too, since there is only one God who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through the same faith. Do we then nullify the law by this faith? Not at all, rather we uphold the law. So there's a lot to unpack in there, because like circumcision comes up out of nowhere, justification, what does that mean? Atonement, all of these things. It's like, could you use normal words, And this is one of the things that always gets me with Romans is Paul's going to go, he's going to talk about this multiple times as we go through. And it's this, he does this thing where he has the point and he circles the point and in a tightening spiral until he gets to it. And it can be frustrating to read, but I'm sure, I don't know, I'm just weird. I just say this, say that, now tell me what to do, And that's not necessarily how this book is written. So let's unpack this just kind of for what it is. The first thing I want to do is I want to unpack a couple of the words in there. First one being justification, right? So justification is used a lot in there, and it's an important word. Justification, the way you would unpack justification in the Bible is imagine a courtroom, right? So if you go into the courtroom and you're on trial, you're the defendant, right? You're on trial, and you've done something wrong, right? So you're on trial and all of this happens, but then all of a sudden you get acquitted. Does that change whether or not you did something wrong? No. Does it? No. But you got acquitted. Why did you get acquitted? Well, in our spiritual lives, the answer to this is simple. Jesus paid the price, therefore we are justified freely. Does this make sense? There's something wrong, something has to be paid. I think the best example for unpacking it in a practical way is probably the O.J. Simpson case, right? Because people still argue to this day, did he do it or did he not? But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because he was acquitted. When it comes to Jesus, when it comes to your faith, did you do wrong or did you not? Well, in the past, it just doesn't matter. Why? Because Jesus, right? And so that's the justification. The other one is faith. Well, a lot of times, we talked about this a little bit in the last few weeks, but a lot of times when we read faith, we'll interject into faith a meaning, because faith is one of those words that can mean lots of things. I have faith in you. That means that I believe in you. I have faith that you will do this. That means I trust you that you will do this. I am faithful. That means that I am devoted to whatever, right? Or I am committed to whatever. You see what I'm saying? It's one of those words that it has multiple meanings that all are in the same category, but they're not all exactly the same. So if you're putting your own definition of faith when it's being read into a passage, you may be picking one that maybe isn't exactly on point. Does this make sense? So when we read faith in here, you need to be reading constant. Well, first there are a couple. One is belief. And then the other is devotion and commitment, right? And so you have to interject that. So early on, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ, belief to all who believe. So you have faith in Jesus, you believe in him, but then also you are committed to him and devoted to him. Does this make sense? So we have that. The other thing that we got to unpack from this passage, and maybe it's just me, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I might be the only one with the problem here, is the differences in what Paul is addressing and what we sometimes will read into it when we read about the law. Does this make sense? Because a lot of times for me, when I read into it about the law, you're justified apart from the law and all of this, I read two different things into it. I will either read into it American Christian legalism, right? And so I can never do enough to earn my salvation. I'm messed up and I need Jesus. Does this make sense? Or I'll read into it the opposite of that, which would be American Western humanism, meaning people who believe they can be good enough. They just need to be good people. That's essentially what humanism is. We believe that people are essentially good and that you just need to be a good person, right? And so when we read law, that's what I tend to interject in there just out of natural habit. Does this make sense? Because of my context. But what Paul's talking about here is different. Now, the outcome is similar to what we would see as legalistic churches, but it's not the same. Paul's talking about, when he talks about the law, he's talking about Judaism. He's talking about his prior religion. That's what he's talking about. And he's saying, now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known. He's saying that like outside of that, Jesus has done something here. And this is important because it makes sense of why circumcision comes up so much when Paul's talking. Because circumcision is a ritual by which a family, like a whole family, enters into the Jewish faith. Now that could be a young boy at 8 days old, or it could be someone who converts. If you convert, you have to be circumcised. This is a mark of being one of God's people. And so when he's talking about the law, he's saying those who follow God's rules, those who are part of God's chosen people, the Jews. That's what he's talking about, right? And that's important. Now, where that evolves to over the course of time, originally they were God's people set apart, and God gave them these laws so that they would follow them, and it would ultimately make their lives better. They weren't arbitrary. But where that evolves to over time is a form of legalism, right? But it's much bigger than that. It's not just, hey, you can be saved apart from legalism. The argument he's making here is that Jesus came for everybody, not just for the Jews. And so you don't have to make yourself a Jew to become a Christian. He came for everybody. That's an important point. And that's actually the first point. Salvation is free. There's no buy-in. There's no buy-in, you know. That's in our context, it's a big deal. In that context, it might have been a bigger deal because he's making the argument, you don't have to become something different culturally first. You have to be transformed by the power and grace of Jesus Christ. These are two different things. And he's essentially what he's saying is, man, we couldn't even live under that law. Jesus fixed it. He justified us, and now we're free from it. And if our hearts are oriented towards God, we will fulfill the law. That's the last point, so I'm ahead of myself. But we will fulfill the law, and ultimately, this will all work, but it's a matter of orientation. And so salvation is free. You think about that, that's kind of insane. Think about the rest of the world. Think about every other thing that you want to become a member of, right? So I'm listening to a podcast right now, and I'm in a bit of a podcast black hole. Yeah, I don't know. This might be a generational thing. Like there's sometimes like I'll get on YouTube and then like 2 hours later I realize what happened. You know, podcasts can be that way for me too. Like where I'll listen to one and then it'll suggest another one, and then like 5 steps down the line I'm somewhere completely different. So I'm listening to this podcast right now, and it's a podcast on a girl whose dad, or a lady now, whose dad was in the Hells Angels motorcycle club, and they're unpacking all this stuff, and it's super interesting. It's also super terrifying. But the basics of they talked about a person who they called him a hanger on, and basically he hung around the club because he wanted to be a part of the club, but he hadn't proved that he could be in the club yet, right? So he's a hanger-on. And then he became a prospect. So he proved himself enough. There was a huge fight that made the news all over the place back in the, 70s in Cleveland. And he was a part of that fight. A bunch of people got killed, so he proved himself, so he became a prospect. But then right after that fight, they made a rule in this specific chapter that to become a part of the club, you had to kill somebody. That's a pretty big buy-in, right? Now, most of the clubs you're a member of don't have a big buy-in. Some of your credit cards have a $500,000, $600,000 buy-in. You got to pay them money to then take your money. But then you get points that are given back to you, fractions on the dollar. You're part of a cool kid club, I guess. right? There are other things. I mean, look, half of you have a gym membership, statistically speaking, I'm not judging you. A bunch of y'all got a gym membership that you paid for and you had to pay money up front, and then you also have to keep paying for a year. The buy-in is a year-long commitment. You ain't been to the gym in 6 months, but you like, I might go, so I'm not paying the fee to get out. That's how gyms make money, right? If you, all the way down to our kids, right? If you want to become a member of the NJHS or the NHS, how do you get in? Well, the buy-in is you're studying and you got to get good grades. Or you want to be on a soccer team, it's going to cost you $8 million and you're going to have to travel every weekend. Right? Everything, it seems like most of the things in life have a buy-in. Jesus doesn't. Believe, right? So he says all of that. Verse 27, we jump ahead to verse 27. So remember, it's free. There's no buy-in. You didn't do anything to earn it. And he says, then where's the boasting? It's excluded. Because of what law? The law that requires works? No, because of the law that requires faith. For we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Where's the boasting? This is that question. To me, that question sounds a little bit like, what? Because I don't know. I grew up in a place where if y'all met my mama, you'd understand. You can't brag. You don't brag. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, you do so much not to brag that it would be better for you to envision every way it could go wrong. You know? And so that question is kind of out of left field for me. But when you unpack where Paul's coming from, he's coming from a very zealous religious sect. And what he's saying is where's the boasting? These people, the portion of Judaism that he would have come from, being a Pharisee, it would have been like, I uphold every single one of these things. I do all of these things right. And in doing all of these things right, that makes me the best in this culture. That makes me the first amongst all of us. Amongst God's people, I am the most faithful. Right? You ever met anybody like that? It's uncomfortable. Right? And where's the boat? There can't be any. There's nothing to be proud of. You didn't earn it. It was free. It was free. Verse 28, we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Right? So he's saying that, unpack this with me. I've been saved and I am being saved, right? So in our verbiage, the I've been saved, that would be salvation. That would be I've entered into a relationship with Jesus. I am a Christian now, right? I am being saved. God is sanctifying my life. God is making me more holy on a regular basis. I am becoming more like Jesus on a daily basis, right? So the justification is a singular process and an ongoing process. And so when Paul says, there's nothing to boast about, not only is he saying there's nothing to boast about because you were saved by your faith. You were saved because you have faith. All you had to do was believe. He's also saying there's nothing to boast about because you're continually being saved by your faithfulness, and that's it. There's nothing else that you can do. Now, this is where I think we begin to struggle. This is where I think we begin to struggle because we're just like everybody else. We have the same problem. We have the same problem as the Jewish leaders would have had back then. We want a list of things to do, right? We want the diet to get it right. How do I fix the scale? How do I make this work? And so we search and claw and scratch and try to get that. You'll hear people talk. Okay, so one time, I've only done this once. We had a 21 days of prayer and fasting. back in the I don't know, this was 2017. And we were having it, and like I was like maybe a year into leading at the church in La Plata, and like I was 27. And this church, most people in this church were twice my age. And so you get this feeling of like, I got to prove myself. And then you also get this feeling of like, well, how can I do that? And then one of the best ways to do that is to just like if I can make people understand that I am spiritually mature enough, maybe they'll listen. And that's not how I processed it. How I processed it was, we need to up the spiritual intensity here. How I unpacked it 5 years later is, well, I was being an arrogant little jerk, right? And so this is what happened. I got my leadership team together. I looked at them, I said, I'm gonna do a 21-day fast where I'm not gonna do anything but drink stuff. I'll drink juice just so that I have some level of energy, but that's it. And then I proceeded to put on the best show of peer pressure of all time. And I got like 5 of us doing it. And so we spent 21 days. Well, we spent the first 2. What we did was we spent 21 days dreaming of food. The first 3 days were awful. So the first day, it was like, okay, I can manage. The second day was, I'm gonna eat somebody's face. And then the third day was worse than that. We went to this, on the third day, we had a seminar to go to. We went there, and you walk into this building, they're providing lunch. So they give you a break, they set lunch out, and you walk in, and just the smell of sandwiches hit me in the face. And I've never wanted a cheap grocery store sandwich, like deli sandwich. You know what I'm talking about? Soggy bread, like the American cheese is turned into slime sandwich. I had never wanted one of those so bad in my life. And we complained so hard for that whole day that the guy who went with us who wasn't fasting like that was like, man, y'all are annoying and big babies. And that was pretty much how the whole 21 days went. It got easier, but it was just this thing. And like at the end of the day, I thought I was checking off a box. I thought I was being spiritual. And all I did was lose 35 pounds in 21 days to gain 40 in 30. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's all that happened. Like, I had to buy new clothes that I could wear for 2 weeks, you know? Like, we want a list of things we can do. When it comes down to it, we want a list of things we can do. Maybe not to boast, but to prove to ourselves that we're better. Why? Yeah. Let's keep moving. I think we'll answer the question. Verse 29. Or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles too? Yes, of the Gentiles too, since there is only one God who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through that same faith. Do we then nullify the law by this faith? Not at all. Rather, we uphold the law. The last point is I can never be good enough. Right? I can never be good enough. We uphold the law by our faith. So here's the thing. We want to prove that we're getting better because it makes us feel like we're getting better, and it makes us feel like we're closer to God. And it's why in church, like it's why when you like, there are often times that people will come up and be like, I just want to go deeper. And my reaction to that initially is like not the most pastorally, because if you're like in the church enough, you know the church enough to be able to say the words, I just want to go deeper, you should be able to do that on your own, right? So my initial reaction to that is like, probably not the best, But when you unpack it, what someone's saying there is, I need to, they're saying a lot like what Thomas was saying when they told Thomas that Jesus had risen from the dead. I won't believe it until I put my finger in his hands and I touch the wound on his side. I won't believe it until it's similar, because what they're saying is, I just need to feel like I believe this more. I just need to feel like this is moving in me. And here's the problem. The relationship with God is just that, it's a relationship. And so it doesn't move on your timeline, just like none of your relationships move on your timeline. When I started dating my wife, it took her 3 months to admit, I swear it was 3 months, it may not have been, but it felt like 3 months to admit that we were even dating. So in December, we start kind of hanging around each other. By January, I've got her to go on a date with me, or maybe it was in December. She will correct me later. And we got her to go on a date with me. And I said, hey, what are you doing on Friday night? And she said, I'm studying on Friday. I said, all day? She said, yeah. All night too? Well, can we go out? Yeah, okay. Right? So we go out. And we were hanging out. Like, we were hanging out every weekend for it felt like forever. But it was just like, this is my friend. She didn't want the relationship to change, because she felt like if our relationship changed, it would change all the relationships around us. And so even though she was doing the things that you do when you're dating somebody, she wasn't saying that she was dating somebody, because if she called it that, then that messed everything up, right? And so here was the problem. I'm sitting here getting frustrated. You're not supposed to argue with somebody that you're dating like that early on. You know what I'm saying? You're supposed to hide the bad parts of yourself for a while. You know, like it's like a catch-22. If you hold on long enough, then they'll be roped in, and then you show them the ugly, you know? And that's what I was trying to do. But I had to argue her into admitting that we were dating. And she did, and we're married. She's trapped, so I just trapped her later. But relationships do not progress on your timeline. They just don't. And put yourself in God's shoes, because they never progress on either person's timeline. How frustrated must he be in heaven going, come on, right? It's a relationship. It's a relationship. And so I can't be good enough, just like you've had this fight, just like you can never be good enough for your spouse. That's uncomfortable. But you fight about the same things over and over again. And you're both guilty of making the other one feel like they're not doing a good enough job. If your whole goal in your marriage is to be good enough for the other person, you're going to be unsatisfied forever. Right? What is the goal? The goal is to know each other better and understand each other better every day, so that you can build a better life together. That's the goal of God. We want him to give us a to-do list. But really what he wants is increasing faithfulness. Faithfulness, meaning commitment and devotion. Well, that's what your spouse wants. See, now you know how to work this relationship a little bit better. Maybe not a lot better, but a little bit better than you did before, right? And that's the thing. Our focus is in the wrong place. Our eyes are in the wrong place. We just want it to work right. That's the problem. It's the problem with big plans. It's the problem with rules. It's the problem with all of this stuff. We want it to all lay out the way we want it to. We want to be able to do all the things that we do right. And then it's why when the church tends towards legalism, it doesn't work. We just eat ourselves alive. Right? But it's also why when a church or an individual moves away from God and away from the word, it doesn't work, and we just become this blah nothing. There's this middle ground. There's this middle ground that we're supposed to be on, where our goal is to love God better every day. And if we're listening to him, if we're listening to him, then we're loving God better every day, and our love for people is growing in proportion to our love for God. And in that place is where we find wholeness. And in that place is where we find a relationship that works. And in that place is where we find things working. And is it always going to be great? No. I'll give you one more story. So Man and I were building a house a couple years ago. We to be able to afford to build this house, and it's the smallest house in the neighborhood. So we scratched it by, right? To be able to afford to build this house, we lived in my parents' basement for 2 years. So we were both working, living in my parents' basement for 2 years. There's a lot of problems with living in your parents' basement. We had less than most people because my parents are pretty great. But one of them is you never have the arguments that you need to have. You know how you just need, maybe not arguments, but conversations even. Like the hard conversations, you don't have them. There are always people around. Like you never just have those conversations. And those are the most important ones because those are the things that are bothering something that's meaningful to you, right? And you don't have them. So we had that going on. And then we had the fact that we were building a house. And every meeting to build a house is a meeting where you leave way more poor than when you came in. They're like, oh, you have this allowance to put in a kitchen. And then the allowance is not matching what she wants in the kitchen, you know? And then it's like, oh, you pick and then not just that, you argue over, maybe not argue, but you're never gonna agree on colors. You're never gonna agree on everything. Literally our whole house is that base builder grade white paint. Because I looked at her and I was like, do you wanna decide on a color right now? We've decided on everything else. And she said, nope, right? So we're building this house, and during this time, we were really faithful. We were really, really faithful in date night. We were really faithful in doing that. It was probably the most consistent that we had been. But every time we'd go on a date night, we'd have to argue the first half to be able to hang out the second half. Because the hard conversations weren't being had and we were stressed out. And it was awful, right? And I just remember one time we went to Richmond and I picked out this restaurant and I'm like, there's gonna be stuff for her to eat here. And they got steak, I'm winning. Because she's vegan, right? So steak and vegan, not, anyway, I'm like, I'm winning. We walk in and there's nothing for her to eat. And to top it off, we had bickered the whole way there. And I'm like, this is terrible. Why? And now I have to ride back an hour and a half to get home. But that hour and a half drive was the most important. The hour and a half back was the most important part of the whole night. Because the only thing that fixes times like that in your life is time spent. It's time spent together. It's time spent together, right? So when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to our relationship with God, it's time spent. It's a relationship. There's not a list that works. I got to figure it out. It's not always going to be, we're not always going to be on the same page. I always, in this relationship, have to fight to get on his page. And the only thing that's going to fix it is time spent. But if the time is spent, then I will spend more time in my life in this place where my love for God is growing every day and my love for people is growing in proportion to it. And that's the goal, right? It's not that our behavior won't change, right? That's the thing, is your goal is to be better. It's not that you won't be better. It's that in focusing on him, I become better for the right reasons. When I have my priorities straight, when I have my focus right, things happen correctly. There's nothing to boast about. I didn't earn it. My faithfulness just grew, right? That's what Paul's saying. And that's where we need to end up. Can I pray with you? God, thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for being patient with us even when we just want you to do things to make our lives easier. And that's not the goal. Our goal is that we be more faithful to you. The goal is that we be more like you. The goal is that we would find fulfillment in that journey. And so, God, I just pray that as we all kind of enter in or continue in to that journey, that you would give us that you give us that you give us the endurance, that you give us the grit, that you give us the faith, that you give us the strength to spend the time, even when the time doesn't make sense, or even when the time's not what we want, and even when we feel like it's pointless. God, if you would grant us the grace to be better followers of you, that would be awesome. And God, I just pray that when it's all said and done, and that when we look back on our lives, that we'd be able to look back and say that, my faithfulness grew every day because I built my life on your love and on your strong foundation and on your mercy and on everything you did for me. And that instead of being somebody who maybe could be proud of the person we were, we'd just be glad because we got to follow you. We love you and we thank you. Amen.